Each one of us are passionate about different things. Maybe you're passionate about music, cheer, gaming, pickleball. Okay, that might be one your grandma is passionate about. Either way, there are things that we will talk on and on and on about, or revisit, or rewatch, or redo. But there are also things that we as a society seem to be getting increasingly dispassionate about. There are overwhelming atrocities that we become desensitized to because it just seems like one bad thing after another keeps happening. Someone else was kidnapped. Another person was abused. More people were injured in a mass tragedy. Another war breaks out. For the past few weeks, we've been talking about injustice. We know that there are events and experiences that are not fair or just, and in theory, we wish somebody somewhere would shift those situations from bad to good. But when we begin to think of all the injustice in the world, or even just all the injustice we've been talking about, it can feel so overwhelming that we just disengage and try not to think about it out of self-preservation. Questions like, what should I do? Or what can I do can become too much to think about. After all, what is something that will actually make a difference when it comes to injustice? Just to make sure we're all on the same page, let's define that word injustice once more. When you hear people talk about justice, it simply means something that is right, fair, or equal. Injustice is the opposite of that. When we talk about injustice, we're talking about the things in our world that are unfair, unequal, or not right. People getting bullied at school, that's injustice. Victims of human trafficking, injustice. Families in poverty, injustice. Students not having the tools or resources or internet access they need to keep up with classes, believe it or not, that's injustice. Kids not having meals on days with no school breakfast or lunch, injustice. Women not being paid the same as men for the same job, injustice. People being treated differently and being discriminated against, that's injustice. The list goes on and on. When you think about it this way, chances are you can see plenty of areas of injustice in our world. And if you're honest, that probably makes you think something like, wow, there's a lot of terrible things happening in the world. Somebody, somewhere should do something about all of this. And so far, we all agree. We all get that. There's a need for more someones to do some things. Check. But I want you to pay attention to what I say next because it's the whole point of this series. And it could be a phrase that passes right through your mind, having no effect, or it could change the course of your life. So here we go. You are somebody who could do something. And maybe you are somebody who should do something. The question is, will you do something? You have the ability to do good in a world filled with lots and lots of bad. And maybe you have done something. Maybe you have brought some good in spite of some really, really bad situations. But then the realization hits that it's not just a one and done battle. So many people, including some of you and some of your leaders, have spent years fighting against things like racism, poverty, prejudice, and gender inequality. You know that this work isn't easy or fast and that everyone who is ready to do something has to be ready to do that for the long haul. But you could also feel overwhelmed and apathetic because you realize that it's emotionally, mentally, and even spiritually exhausting to deal with and fight against the long list of injustices happening in our world. As much as we're talking and praying about doing something about injustice, the reality is that to you, it truly feels like a problem that just can't be solved. Maybe you're thinking, injustice has always happened and it's still happening. Is there really any hope of it changing? Maybe you're wondering how you, just one person, can make a difference in massive problems like racism, human trafficking, sexism, poverty, and more. Is it even possible for one teenager to make a difference in any meaningful way? Maybe you're so tired of talking about it and trying to explain to people who don't seem to care that you wonder if it's even worth trying anymore. Will people ever care as much as you do? Or maybe you've experienced injustice for so long that you wonder if saying anything or doing anything is really going to make a difference. It hasn't so far, so why would it now? Is there any way all of this bad can become something good? Believe me, I totally get that because you're right. Standing up and doing something about injustice isn't easy. It is overwhelming. It is something that feels like somebody bigger and stronger and older or more powerful should be doing. It feels like somebody somewhere needs to do some good, right? Well, remember what we said. You could be that somebody. I want us to consider a compelling idea written by a guy named James. Now, here's the thing. James was the brother of Jesus. Talk about the ultimate sibling rivalry. Can you imagine growing up in the same family as Jesus? Of course, it can't have helped that Jesus is literally God in human form. For those of you who have siblings, you probably feel James' pain. And just like you've never thought your brother is the Son of God, neither did James, while Jesus was alive, that is. But after Jesus died and was raised back to life, let's just say that when your brother rises from the dead, there is no more sibling rivalry and your entire life changes. That's literally what happened with James. After Jesus' resurrection, James was appointed the leader of the Jerusalem church by the apostles, and he remained a respected leader of this growing movement called the Way until his death around AD 62. History records that James was martyred for his faith in his brother that he once didn't believe in. Let that sink in for a second. And there is something else you should know about James. He had a nickname, a moniker that speaks to this series. James was known throughout Jerusalem and the surrounding areas as James the Just. That James wrote a letter to a group of first century Christians who are facing severe injustice, and he challenged them by saying this: suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, "Go in peace, keep warm and well fed," but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? James is addressing what seemed to be a common occurrence in first century post-resurrection Jerusalem. People were seeing a physical need, but instead of meeting that need, doing good, they would say a blessing, but be of no good. It would be the equivalent of you walking by someone sitting outside who is obviously cold, freezing, and you have the means to help them stay warm, but instead you say, "Hey, I'm praying for you. Hope you get warm soon," and you keep walking. When you put it that way, it sounds heartless. And if we're honest, I think that's what we're all tempted to do sometimes. When faced with the hugeness of a problem that we can't seem to solve, we often just settle for saying or posting something and doing nothing. When we see something unjust happening in our town, in our city, we think about how bad it is. We may even say so, but sometimes that's exactly where our involvement stops. When we see someone we know struggling to have their needs met, we might say we'll pray for them, and we probably do, but of course, we don't want to get in their business, so it stops there. We don't do much else. When we see racial injustice happening in our country, we might post about it on our social media feeds when it meets our purpose, but then we move on. So many of us don't do the harder work of learning about it, speaking up about it, or standing up to it when we see it happening. This, by the way, isn't a generational thing. This is a human thing. Even adults way older than you feel the temptation to hold back when it comes to injustice. And don't get me wrong here. Thinking about it is a good thing. Praying about it is a powerful thing. Posting something is important. All of that is good. But if our doing some good stops there, we've missed some of what it means to follow Jesus. You see, following somebody means you do the kind of thing they would do. Jesus was always doing good in the face of the injustice that took place around him. Maybe you've heard about how Jesus spoke up for the poor, cared for the sick, hung out with people who were outcast, and confronted leaders who were treating people unfairly. Did Jesus offer his words? Absolutely. But he also offered his actions. He lived in a way that showed the world what it looks like to value people, and as his followers, we can do the same. Look at what James went on to say here. In the same way, faith by itself, if it's not accompanied by action, is dead. James was saying that our faith and our actions are connected. If we say we have faith, but it doesn't motivate us to do something, then something about our faith is broken, incomplete, lacking. And here's why that's a big deal. Living a life of faith is about becoming more like Jesus. And even if you've missed every part of this series so far, here's the part I want you to always remember. When it came to injustice, Jesus was always doing good, always. And when we make that shift to allow our prayers and words turn into action, we're becoming more like who we're praying to. We're becoming more like Jesus. The things that make you feel sad or angry that you know aren't right, the injustices that motivate you to act, those things that hurt you and the people you love, those are all wrongs in the world that God wants to see made right. They are the bad we're called to shift into good. And not just tossing in some good here and sprinkling some good over there and in a way where you can look back and say, that's good enough. We're called to more. Because good enough is never good enough, justice never stops. There's no line on a measuring cup that will tell us that the good we're doing now is good enough. There's not a finish line to doing good. When it comes to justice, it's an ongoing effort, a movement, a lifelong commitment. It may feel overwhelming, like our little actions won't have any impact on such giant problems, but small changes are still changes, and they're good changes in the right direction. Now, some of you get this because you've been doing good things about the problems of injustice for a long time. You've been speaking up for people, showing up to help, posting and working. And because of that, here's what you know for sure. This work is exhausting. Doing something means you have the same conversations over and over. It means you don't show up one time, check the box and move on. You show up over and over and over, and that can feel exhausting. You may feel like you're fighting a losing battle, that every little thing you're doing, it just isn't working or adding up. You probably feel discouraged at times, wondering if this is a battle that can even be won. Well, if that's you, I want you to hear from somebody else who met Jesus, who hung out with his followers, including James, and who spoke to people facing huge injustice. It's the Apostle Paul. And here's what he said. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time, we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people. Don't get weary when you're doing good, Paul said. In other words, don't give up. Don't give in when the good work gets hard. Instead, keep going, keep working, keep moving forward. And Paul would know, if you were to do a deep dive into Paul's story, you'd see that he used to be one of the most prejudiced, bigoted, unjust people around. But just like James the Just, after Paul encountered the resurrected Jesus, his entire life's purpose and mission was this laser focus toward doing good. Let me show you what I mean. Fighting injustice is like planting seeds. See, here's what I would do. I would take seeds, I would have some dirt, I would plant these seeds in the hole in the dirt. I would then make sure that the seeds are deep in the dirt. Then you decide to water it because it needs that nourishment to grow. You give it sunlight and time to grow. You pray and pray and pray and pray that God grows this plant. And then you keep doing that until something blooms. You won't see much at the beginning. And you may even think that at times this plant won't ever sprout. But underground, there's a whole lot happening. Eventually the plant will pop up, and before long, it'll be harvest time. See, the work you're doing and the injustices in the world that breaks your heart, they aren't new. And that means this tug of war between doing good and injustice isn't new either. There have been people who have been moving to right wrongs and do good in this world for decades and centuries now. And little by little, there's been change. There's been progress. I am so grateful those people did not give up. They didn't become weary in doing good. The same can be true for us. So, when it comes to injustice, never stop doing something good. It may feel impossible, but little by little, you can change the world. How? Like James encouraged, do something good, and like Paul implored us, keep doing something good. Because good enough is never good enough, justice never stops. So with that said, let me lay out a few ways to keep doing something good about injustice. Use your voice, speak up, say something in the moment, say something on social media, say something to a teacher or an adult who can help. Use the voice you have to speak up and speak out for those who need it. And if that doesn't work, keep saying something until it does. Secondly, use your influence. Maybe people listen to you because they're in your friend group. Use that influence to talk about injustice with them. Maybe your family has resources that can help other people. Ask how you can use those. Maybe your family has connections or a lot of opportunities. Ask how you can use your opportunities to help someone else get more opportunities. And use your talent. You don't have to give up on basketball or theater or Spanish class or whatever your hobby is. Use the talent God has given you to do some good for others. Lean into what you're good at to do some good. Maybe you use your art to do something about injustice you see in your school. Maybe you use the fact that you're on a sports team to get a whole team to speak up or to serve others. Maybe you can use the opportunity you have as a school tutor to help kids who need it. If you aren't sure how to start or what you have to offer, ask God. Ask God to show you. Then ask your small group leader. They can tell you not only what talents they see in you, but they can help you brainstorm ways you can put them to work for the sake of others. And lastly, use your life. We're not talking about just one service project or signing up to volunteer a few times. Injustice is everywhere, and part of following Jesus is making a commitment to do good and keep doing good. It's making a lifelong commitment to do the work. Of course, that means you have to take care of yourself in the process. You may need to find some people who can encourage you, who can remind you that doing something is worth it, even when it doesn't feel like it. In the beginning, God created this world we live in, and God said that it was good. This world does not always live up to the goodness of when God first created it. But each of us, we are also a part of God's good creation, which means we have the ability to infuse good back into the world when injustice creeps in and taints things. Maybe before this, you've never thought about God as caring about injustice. For some of us, this idea has even changed the way we think about God altogether. Goodness flowed from God when God created earth, and it was good. Goodness flowed from God when God created humans, and God called us good. Injustice is a big, bad issue that can feel impossible to overcome, but we are called to do more than just good enough. Before you head to groups, pause with me for a minute. Today, as we're wrapping up this series, I want you to imagine, what if the church actually lived this out? Not just your church, but the church, the entire community of people who follow Jesus around the world. How might the people in your school or your neighborhood see God differently if Christians were known for choosing to see people the way God sees them and treat them as God would? It's not impossible when you begin to think and imagine that kind of future. It's actually filled with possibility. Here's what's wild. This can actually happen, but only if we do some good.